Hey, everybody, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod Barbecue Podcast. On this episode, Hot Rod Barbecue co-founder, creative director at Hemmings, Dan Stoner is in the house in the hot seat. How you
That's
doing, bud?
already a lot of responsibility. I don't know if I'm
Dude,
ready.
it's no, you got to be ready because here's the deal. So today, we are talking about Dan's investigative journalist skills
Ooh.
because he just filmed a docu-series on one of the coolest subjects that you're going to hear about possibly ever. Possibly ever. That's big. Just I
A lot of weight.
teed that up like a son of a bitch right there.
A lot
Right?
of weight.
A lot of weight. Okay. The series that's coming out in March is called Chinatown Confidential. And Mr. Stoner is here to walk you through exactly what's going to blow your mind.
Whoa. It's the drama.
Dude, you see how I did that?
Featuring voiceover by Mike Musto.
Dude, just right. I smoothed it in as good as I see. That just boom right out.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah,
All right,
no,
so what
yeah.
are we watching?
So, if you've seen any of these Motor Underground series, right? Like there's two of them out so far. We call them seasons, but really it's my wish list of stuff to do, right? And
Hmm.
so far it's all California based because that's where the easiest stuff to find right now is, but especially
Sure.
for what we're doing, but it's all underground car culture. It's the stuff that by definition is hard to find, hard to
Right.
get, right? And this story in particular, I when I came to the people above us, our overseers, Mike,
Hmm.
things like that, and I've been yammering for a couple years now about this Chinatown underdog story that I really didn't know if there was a there or not. I didn't know if it
Right.
was a real thing. But I thought, well, there's probably, it was just a rumor. And when I moved here to San Francisco 23 years ago, I think a lot of people don't realize there's real car culture here in the city.
Right. Sure.
It's not on the food blogs, it's not on the shows that you see. Like when people talk about coming to
Yep.
San Francisco, it's way underneath that surface, right?
Yep.
So when I first moved here in 2000, when I started meeting like these other car people, these other car guys, everybody at that time, we all had flip phones because,
Sure. That's what you
smartphones
had.
aren't now yet, but like we all had these flip phones and the ones that you could actually have a photo on your
Hmm.
little burner phone, a lot of these guys had this same picture of this grainy, dilapidated photo of a 56 Chevy that was right nose up with a straight axle under it, like a gasser style
Yep.
car.
Yep.
And underneath that, in like, Kid Picks Corel Roman, it said Underdog. And all these guys were like, dude, have you ever heard about the Underdog? I'm like, what is that? And
Yeah.
why do all these guys I meet have this same picture on their phone? And the legend was that there was a 55 Chevy that was a gasser style car that ran around Chinatown in San Francisco
Really?
in the 60s and 70s. And if that was a really fast car, and if you wanted to race that car, the legend was that you had to first beat a 56 Chevy that was also up on an axle, as they say. And
Hmm.
that car was called the Underdog. So if you could beat the
Huh.
Underdog, then you could race, then you get bragging rights and the chance to race this brutal 55.
Yeah.
Now, I'd heard this rumor and legend for 20 years.
Yeah.
And finally I was like, I got the chance to do this. And we were coming out of COVID and my best friend, his name is Dave, and he was the first one to talk about this legend to me and the first one to show me this picture of this car. And he was so enamored by this legend that he built a tribute car to
Huh.
the Underdog, but he did a 55 Chevy just because he liked 55 Chevys better than
Sure.
50. It was his own thing, but he called it the Underdog, and it's a straight axle car, and it's got a woolly small block
Yeah.
Chevy that's naturally aspirated, but it's up on like on a real tall Edelbrock riser with two fours, gear drive,
Yep.
straight axle under the front. It's got some woolly gears in the rear under a 9 inch. It's got a front end with a tip forward,
Yep.
fiberglass nose,
Yep.
whole thing, right? It's got some woolly four-speed that was built by a guy named Hightower in North Carolina who builds like one-off race
Yeah.
transmission. And he
Okay.
spent like 2 years ordering this thing and
Right. Right. Right.
right. So it's barely legal, it's
Right.
basically a race car with license plates and no turn signals. But he built this thing. It's amazing. He's running around the city. And to run a car like that around the city, as you know, Mike, especially being a motorcycle guy, the city is full of hills,
Oh,
transitions.
and you're talking hills with a 48 to 50-degree incline in some
Yeah,
spots, and that's not an
yeah,
exaggeration, right?
not at
This is the
all.
Bay Area. This is the Bay
Right,
Area.
right. And if you're running one of those cars around, no front brakes, drag slicks in the rear,
Oh,
a four-speed,
oh my
um,
God.
imagine, right? And then on those transitions, you're also talking about like cable car tracks and all these. If it's damp and you hit one of those,
Oh yeah. Hello, sideways.
yeah, right. So like for him to run that thing around the city is a big deal. And for these guys, what for me, what was the bigger story was that I would stop these guys as they were telling me the story. I'm like, okay, I get it. A 55 Chevy on an axle, no
Cool.
big deal. You're talking about Chinese kids in Chinatown doing this?
Exactly. Right.
That was the big deal, right? Like, makes no sense.
Right.
If you've ever been to Chinatown in San Francisco, it is like it's like going to Middle Earth. I mean, it is
Pretty
like,
much. It's stepping back in time. I mean,
yeah,
it is an untouched relic
it
that
really is.
is an amazing place. It's honestly, it's an amazing place to go. But I will tell you this: if and when you go, you won't feel like you're in San Francisco.
Oh, there's like, powdered bison eyeballs and like,
Yeah.
ear
Yeah.
sticks made out of like lizard,
Oh yeah.
so like it is the most wild neighborhood, I think, in San Francisco.
Hmm.
In a neighborhood, in a city full of wild neighborhoods, right?
Correct.
It is unbelievable. So I just thought there's a story here, and I don't know much more about it than other than this legend that I had heard. So
Yeah.
finally, Jono and the crew above us said, "Okay, you've been yammering about this for long enough. Now you got to go do it." And I
Yeah.
was like,
Prove it.
"Oh, shit." So
Prove it.
so yeah, prove it, right? And so I felt like it was the right time to do it because unfortunately, and it was like we're still all reeling from this. Unfortunately, Dave passed away during COVID,
Yeah.
and we lost him. And I had always talked to him, and he and I had like sit on his back porch and drinking whiskey and
Yep.
talking about this underdog story, and that someday we were going to go find the original underdog. We were
Yep.
going to find that 56 Chevy. And we were going to line up his car and that car and actually race down Great Highway, which was one of the
Yeah.
race joints in the city, right?
Yep.
And we talked about that for years, and everybody around us talked about that for years, and they all wanted to see Dave do this, and they all wanted to find the underdog. And I thought, okay, I mean, now's the
I'm
time, right?
in.
Right,
Yeah.
coming out of COVID, and I don't know about you, but like you start to feel your mortality a little bit, and you're like, if I don't do some of the projects that I want,
Yeah. They're not getting done, man.
not getting done, right? So we did it. So we started looking into it, and I said, I tapped my film crew who I like, use for Motor Underground. I was like, all right, guys, look, I don't know if there's a story there or not. I don't know, but we're gonna find
Right.
out.
Yep.
And so through about 4 degrees of Kevin Bacon, I got in touch with a guy that owns one of the only nightclubs in the city in Chinatown. And he said, okay, I know all these old guys and I know where,
And
I know the
dude,
number to call. Yeah.
you just hit one of the things, right? I know all these old guys. You remember,
Yeah.
you're talking about street racing from the 60s and the 70s. So
Right.
these guys that raced back then are in their late 70s and their 80s or older now.
That's right.
So there is no other time but to do this than now
Don't do
because
it
I got
now. We're
news.
losing them.
That's right. You're going to lose the history.
And think of it this way too. In the 60s and 70s, not only was there these group of guys apparently running around on these straight axle, tri-5 Chevys and GTOs and
Yeah.
stuff, but they're daily drivers,
Hmm.
they're kids, and then also at the same time, they had things like the Black Panthers that they were dealing with at the time, the Summer
Right.
of the hippie movement, right?
Vietnam, all of that stuff.
Vietnam, the Chinese Tongs that no one wants to talk
Yeah.
about. At the same time, Bruce Lee was literally walking around on the streets of Chinatown at the same time these guys were building these cars.
Crazy.
It was crazy.
Wow.
And not only did you have Bruce Lee running around, but then you all of a sudden you had like these Chinese like martial arts movies coming into like the
That's
theaters.
right. That's
So you
right.
had like a lot of this like these urban neighborhoods, San Francisco, LA, New York, Chicago, all these kids in these urban neighborhoods, black, brown, yellow, they were
Yep.
all watching these like kung fu movies and going out there and like practicing kung fu moves, which then turned into early breakdancing. So
Right.
locking and that all comes from like the drunken monkey
Right.
style of kung fu or whatever it
Right.
is, So all these things were happening at the same time around these kids building these cars.
Yeah.
So we started digging into it and we found some of these, to your point, found some of these old guys and they're like, yeah,
Yeah.
we did this. We did this. And
Yeah.
I kept saying, but have you ever heard of the Underdog? And they're like,
Yeah.
hmm, I have heard of the Underdog. Or, yeah, I remember seeing that thing. Or
Yeah.
I remember a guy had it and he got dropped off at school in it. We are chasing this ghost that
Yeah.
nobody ever really has any like intimate knowledge of. They've all seen it from a distance. They remember hearing about it. Their brother thinks that his brother ran against the car out on the Great Highway
Hmm.
or in the middle of the night down by Candlestick Park. But no one has ever really said to me that they have actual street knowledge
Yeah.
racing the car or being in the car or leaning up against the car smoking a cigarette or anything. It's all like
Right.
I've seen it off in the distance somewhere.
Sure.
So we're still chasing the actual Underdog as we speak. We're still trying
Yeah.
to find this thing. Um, and then and I don't want to ruin it for anyone who, decides to listen to this particular episode of the barbecue, but something amazing happens and
Yeah.
the power of Hemmings comes through in the most random way. We start to actually gain some traction because as this production has been going along, I mean, you know as well as I do, we're given deadlines and like we have to
Oh,
have
yeah.
video
Production
done.
deadlines, air dates. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And we got to have them done by a certain time. And this idea that we're chasing this ghost around San Francisco trying to find evidence of this car,
Oh,
we're
yeah.
finding all these other guys who are doing this stuff, but we still haven't found the car yet. And where did it go? What
Right.
happened to it? We're still chasing it. So
Right.
it's still like my crew is like, all right, Dan, as they pop another one, like, I don't know what we're gonna do. Like,
Yeah.
still looking for it.
Well, what I love about this, and you could get into the beauty of what happened, right? Because it's an amazing story. But what I love about this whole Chinatown Confidential story more than anything else is that when you think of the traditional American hot rodder, what do you
Yeah,
think of? You
right.
think of a younger white guy down in SoCal,
Yeah.
doing hot rodding with a small block Chevy and all this other stuff, right? What you don't think about are the Asian Americans. You don't think about the African Americans who are so pivotal in every part of car culture that has ever blessed this country. And we talk about it all the time. It's like, God, this hobby stretches so far and it has attached itself to every different color and creed and race and religion. And the fact that you're able to kind of do this investigation and delve into a part of American culture that many people had no idea even existed.
Yes.
That's the most exciting thing to me about about this whole series.
You and me both, man. Like I had no idea. And when I first started hearing about it, like nobody thinks of the Chinese as sort of like a bedrock of car culture or hot rodding of all things.
No.
We think of the Japanese for like
Yeah.
the Japanese domestic market, the
Right.
JDM movement, and like
Yep.
the drift racing and all that stuff, Fast and Furious, right? But
Sure.
what we're really talking about here are um, what they themselves call the difference between ABCs and FOBs. You got the ABCs, which stands for American Born Chinese, and
Hmm.
then you got the FOBs, the fresh off the boats, right? Like,
Right.
and that's how they refer to themselves. And as I listen to them, and they've got an entire in Chinatown, there's this entire like economy
Yeah.
and culture and like caste system and all these things that nobody outside of those hard edges of
Yeah.
China, San Francisco, are aware of. It's the oldest Chinatown in the US.
Okay.
Um, these people came over from China. The first Chinese to set foot in America in mass was in this Chinatown in San Francisco because they came over
Wow.
for the gold rush, to
Right.
work
Sure.
gold fields, and then also in all the supporting industries that like
Railroads,
laundry,
everything,
railroad,
construction.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yep.
construction. It's where the whole idea of a Chinese laundry came from because
Yeah.
these immigrants realized that laundry needed to be done. And literally, there were no women in San Francisco for the first like 12 years of the city's existence. It was
Right.
all just miners.
Right.
Guess who wasn't doing their own laundry? So, like, I think
Right.
so. There's this incredible, like, rich culture there that you don't really get to see when you walk down the main drag, which is called Grant Avenue in Chinatown. That if
Right.
anyone comes to the city, that's what they see.
Right.
You get to go to, like, toy boat for dim sum and those kinds of things. But what you don't see and what you don't hear by design is all about like the scene underneath, literally under the streets, underground.
Absolutely.
And which it's really, really interesting to hear these people talk. And they talk about things like there was one region of China that they all came from. And because of this thing called the Chinese Exclusion Act in the late 1800s, they weren't allowed to come over and migrate the way that they had started to. You had to be related and you had to be a son, literally.
Okay.
So what they would do is they'd say, okay, we're importing our paper sons, and they would literally just like drum up some paperwork of their own that said, this guy is my son, and they would bring over family members,
Yeah.
distant friends,
Right. Of
that
course.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we still, even in 2023 and 2024, as I'm interviewing these people, these are the children of those people who were still coming over,
Yeah.
and under those kinds of like pretty harsh conditions, which is really interesting.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so let me ask you, when you started doing this research, did you realize how deep of a project that you were getting yourself into? And do
Not at
you
all.
feel you didn't? Okay, because that's what I figured. Because I know that when I just knowing you, when you start to uncover stuff, it's like an onion, right? You just keep peeling back layer after layer after layer because each time you peel something back, the more interesting the story becomes,
Very much.
right?
Very.
So at what point did you kind of stop and just say, Jesus, I didn't realize it went this deep, or I didn't realize it like,
So
when did you really realize that?
there was a point we were one of the things that I'm doing with this is I'm getting as many locations because we got a lot of people who are willing to be interviewed. Although
Mhm.
what's interesting about them is that culturally, what they will tend to do is just go, "Yep, everything was great, everything was fine." Like,
And that's
no, it
it.
wasn't.
Was
Right?
it fun?
Right.
Yes. That's
It's all
not what I'm
fine.
looking
We
for.
just had a good
Right.
time. We were kids. I'm like, no, no, no. We need more than that, right? So, um, these locations that I'm finding, there are these, if you ever see old film noir or if you hear about like the underbelly of Chinatowns across the country, you'll sooner or later hear the word Tong.
Mhm.
And Tong literally means family association.
Okay.
What happened though when those family associations started to, materialize because they had to protect their own families and culture and stuff like that from all these outside oppression, as these things do, the basically the mob element of
Yeah.
of Chinatowns in America really latched themselves onto these family
Yeah.
associations because they were well organized, right?
Sure.
So when you hear Tongs these days, you think, "Ooh, the mob, the Chinese
Yeah.
mafia," right?
Yeah.
And to a degree, that's true. But all of these old Tongs actually own their own buildings in Chinatown. So you can walk around Chinatown and look up and it'll say Hop Sing Tong, or it'll say Ji Kung Tong,
Oh,
or
interesting.
yeah, like they're named. And
Yeah.
people who are like walking around as tourists, most of the time you're looking basically eye level and you're going into shops. If you actually take the time and look up, you'll see these buildings that have these names all over them in Chinese, in Cantonese
Yeah.
characters, also in English. And it'll
Huh.
actually say like, this is this Tong, this is this Tong.
Yeah.
So I wonder, I'd never been inside one. Lord knows I would never be able to, I'd never be allowed
Right.
inside. And I started asking around and I said, hey, could we get into one of these actually to perform some of these interviews? Because
Yeah.
I'm assuming that they're probably pretty cool looking inside if we can actually get in, right?
Yeah.
Real authentic stuff, right?
Yeah.
I actually got into one of them. It was called the Tong, and we were upstairs. And my dumb ass, like I don't really understand sometimes that what I'm asking for isn't allowed to be asked for. I don't,
Right.
and sometimes, on the rare occasion, like one out of every 36 times I ask, someone will actually agree.
Hmm.
Let me
Yeah.
do whatever it is that I'm asking ridiculously to do, right? So we got into this Jikung Tong and we went up 4 flights of these narrow stairs to get up there to the main room. And you pass by, like, on the second or third floor, there's this
Yeah.
door, tiny little door, and you open it up and there's like a bunch of illegal mahjong games going on inside.
Right.
Right. And we're up there and it's like this temple and it's just
Yeah.
everything you want, right? And the walls are lined with all these like photos from the 1920s and
Yeah.
1890s of all these old Tong members. And I'm looking around going, this is wild, like we're filming in here and like this is some history. I don't know if anyone
Yeah.
of us has ever been allowed in here before, certainly not to film. And as we're filming this thing, these 3 men come up the stairs and into this room. And I turn around and look at them. I kid you not, Mike, they all look like the Chinese version of The Sopranos. And you could actually, like, there's Tony,
Yeah.
there's
Uh-huh.
Vinny, there's Uncle June. Like you could see,
Yeah.
it's just the Chinese versions of these
Yeah.
guys. They're wearing like, Tommy Bahama Guayavera shirts over, like,
Yep.
one's got a cigar, they got the like stunner shades, like it's
That's awesome.
the whole thing. And they're like, what are you doing? And they don't say it in English, in Cantonese. They pass over, they don't even look at me, they look at over the people we're interviewing, and we're like, what are they doing here? And
Right.
the couple we're interviewing was looking back like, they're just doing a little story on Chinatown in Cantonese. And I'm like, uh-oh, this does not sound, I don't understand this language, but this does
Right,
not
but you
sound
know what's
healthy.
going on. Yeah, you've been around.
This suddenly doesn't sound healthy for Stoner, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No more hot rod for you. Yeah.
No, so like they're tough finally, and then so they're still not talking to me in English. And the people we were interviewing, she turns to me and she goes, they're wondering why you're here and they're a little worried about it. And what is all this? I'm like, uh-oh. Like,
Yeah.
so
Time to explain.
trying to explain. So a little bit of fast talking, and all of a sudden the one of them just kind of, I don't know, his demeanor just changes and softens a little bit. And he's like, okay, well, he starts talking to me, and turns out one of them is like a Taiwanese magistrate or some sort of like upper level political
Yeah.
office holding guy. Another one is some, I don't want to say nefarious, but he is definitely like a businessman that I really don't want to get
Yeah.
alongside of. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Don't need
And
to
the
owe a
other one,
favor.
yeah, and then the other one's like a cousin, of course, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the 3 of them were standing there and they're talking to me a little bit, and I'm not really understanding them all that well. And I don't think they're really getting me all that much either.
Hmm.
As they were leaving, one of them turns, and my wife hates me when I do this. Sometimes I make, like, when I'm really nervous about something, I'll try to make a joke out of it.
Yeah.
So I'm really nervous at this point because I'm like, are we going to get thrown out of here? At the very
Right.
least, are we going to get thrown out of here?
Right.
At worst, am I ever going to be seen again?
Right.
And then who's going to finish this project? So I turned to, as they're leaving, I turned to one and I go, hey, so how do I join? And the one with the cigar,
Yeah.
he turns around as he's leaving. He looks at me, he goes, you already have, and turns around, walks out. Like,
There you go. Well, let
wow.
me, when you were conducting these interviews, right? Did you find that, because I'm sure, and listen, we all know people in different lines of society.
Yeah.
Did you find that at first the conversation was very stiff and at first information was not free flowing? But as they understood your passion for the subject matter, meaning you were talking about, hot rodding and all this stuff, did you find they softened up and became a little more, kind of uncorked and relaxed with you?
Yes, and I will tell you, that's a great point too, dude. You know, the problem that I run into with projects like this is that, first of all, there's this cultural divide. I mean, they literally they literally speak and write a language I can't understand.
Of course not. Right.
Right. Unlike Spanish, I get, if I'm hearing like a bunch of Goombas in the five boroughs
Yes.
in Italian, I can kind of understand. I get a little bit.
Right.
They're actually getting the
Yeah,
point.
I can navigate.
Yeah. In Cantonese, there is absolutely no way of understanding any of it unless you
Right.
already know something.
Yep.
But so there's that break in the ability to relate to each other
Hmm.
when we're sitting there. And then on top of that, you literally, as you well know, you have a limited amount of time to do any of this stuff because
Absolutely.
our
Sure.
production schedule, right? So what would normally take years of kind of, I don't want to say infiltrating, but years of boots on the ground and getting
Yeah.
comfortable and getting acclimated to the culture, you've got months, weeks,
Right.
sometimes.
Weeks. Yeah.
And yes, that was a huge part of this because we've had to go back and interview a lot of these people 2 and 3 times over just to get them comfortable in revealing more about what they went through. Because we've got newspaper clippings of sniper shootings when the Chinese kids were out on Great Highway drag racing at night.
Yeah.
There was a sniper out there shooting at them, and 4 of these Chinese kids got shot,
Jesus.
and they
Oh my
never
God.
solved it. You know, there's a lot of this. There was a gangland style murder, just the Chinese version of The Godfather, where one warring Tong came in and just mowed down another Tong group of Tong members at a restaurant and basically killed a bunch of white people tourists in the
Yeah.
middle. And these guys were caught in the middle of this. And two
Right.
of them got hit then too. And there's a lot of strife and a lot of violence that was happening back
Yeah.
that time.
Yeah.
And when you talk to them, they're like, no, it was all great. We had a great time. It was just a wonderful time to be a kid. And I'm like, no, it wasn't. No, it
Right.
wasn't.
No. This is the part that I don't think people understand. Right. When you're talking about, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and stuff like that,
Yeah.
you know, Asian Americans still faced an enormous amount of ridicule. I mean, people kind of forget that like during World War II, we had these things called internment camps,
Army camps of the
right?
Japanese. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
We had those, and I know about those because my wife is Japanese and her grandparents were in the internment camps.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those things where, the Asian American community has given so much to
Yeah.
every facet of American culture
Yeah.
and are so overlooked when you talk about things like that are when we talk about kind of American culture like baseball, apple pie, hot
Right.
rodding, things like that.
Well, think
And
about it.
my God, the contributions that are there are just enormous. So when you were talking to these people, did they have stories about that? Did they or were they very reluctant to like be like, yeah, it wasn't,
Very reluctant.
like they were. Yeah.
'Cause I
Okay.
think what I'm finding is that culturally, it's the smiling, the smiling Chinese guy or the smiling
Hmm.
Chinese like selling you something in Chinatown, right? Like that's,
Yeah.
and I think there's a lot of pain and a lot of strife. I think there's a lot
Yeah.
of um, there's a lot of prejudice that's
Yeah.
behind those smiles when they,
Yep.
you know,
Sure.
um, and I think, like I said, culturally, that's the face that they put on for everybody outside of their world. I think there've been a lot of great writers and a lot of great film directors who have kind of approached this topic like um, over the past 30, 40 years. I think it's gotten a little bit better. Like Amy Tan, the writer,
Hmm.
she's done a great job of actually like peeling back some of the layers of
Yeah.
that, explain like how this works. And at some point, immigrant families are immigrant families, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
like who just want their kids to do well,
That's
and
right.
these kids are not unlike that at all. One of the things that I've found, and I'm making this like conjecture in this work, is that these kids, these baby boomer kids that I'm interviewing now who were doing this stuff back then, they were the first real teenagers
Yeah.
in Chinatown of the Chinese that
Okay.
came to America.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Their parents were teens, but they weren't teenagers. Like this
Right.
group were the first ones out smoking cigarettes and
To
wearing,
actually live like teenagers, like an
yeah,
American
listening to rock and
teenager.
roll
Yeah.
music and,
Yeah.
and building straight axle 55 Chevys because, right, like it was fun and that was their only car.
Yeah.
Um, but to get them to talk about the other side of that coin, right? To talk
Yeah.
about like that sniper shooting or getting, ridiculed or not being allowed in certain places or
Yeah.
being robbed or stolen from or whatever. I mean, they don't want to talk about that stuff. I think it's kind of human nature to be like that.
Sure, of course.
But culturally, boy, the Chinese are hard to really. Culturally, it's a tough nut to crack because I've sensed that they really don't want the rest of the world to know what they've been through,
Right. Yeah.
and they've been able to hide, unlike the internment camps with the Japanese or, like I always say, man, every 100 years, all new people. And 100 years,
Hmm.
the downward thumb,
Oh, yeah.
thumb
Huge.
on the Chinese was huge. We don't see that as much anymore, but those people are still
Right.
around, and their
Yeah.
parents are still around to some degree, and they really don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, I really want you to talk about it,
Yeah.
really want you to talk about it,
So
and finally they start to. But like I said, it takes 2 or 3 interviews to do it.
I'm really curious about it because I think the series is going to be one that's going to open a lot of eyeballs, and kind of tell a story that I think for so long has just never been told, and that people are really going to find fascinating. You know, in your research, were you surprised at how, like, when you started to get these guys talking and started to get them, was there a point that they did become excited about it and be like, oh yeah, we drag race this, and this is what we would use, this is how we would build stuff, like, did that crossover happen where it went from trying to do kind of some investigative stuff to just two car guys talking about hot rodding?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because this style of car that they were almost 100% GM cars. That was
Okay.
one thing that was really interesting. So it was either a Tri-5 Chevy or it was a 67 GTO or it was maybe a Chevy 2,
Yeah, sure.
early
Yep.
Nova, a Chevelle, all Chevy stuff. And then, or sometimes an Olds, maybe a 442, one I've seen. But then there was one shop just south of San Francisco in this little tiny, like Brigadoon village called
Yeah.
Brisbane, where it was called Al's Automotive. And Al's Automotive was this guy named Al Fitting, this German dude who had this shop and he did a lot of custom work and a lot of fabrication. And he would sell a kit. It was a straight axle or drop spindles,
Hmm.
tube axle, not even an I-beam,
Yep.
but tube axle. And then he had these things called Al's bars, and they were basically traction bars that he invented
Yeah.
that were almost exclusively built for GM products, GM cars.
Huh.
And he would sell you that kit, and it was like $150 painted or $300 chromed if you had the
Yeah.
extra couple bucks. And these Chinese kids were going down to this guy's shop and having these cars built there. And when I sit down and ask them about it, they really get into it. And then it's just car guy and car guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're talking about like how the rear slapper bars worked and the tube axle and how like
Yeah.
they were getting they were getting a lot of grief from the fuzz, who were like, car's too high off the ground. Like, no, it's not, and they
Right. Right. Right.
give them like street tests right there on the spot and
Yep.
stuff like that. They really do talk about that. And we uncovered in this search for the underdog, we've actually uncovered a few of those original, what they just call Al's bars
Yeah.
cars, still in existence.
So,
And
so did
yeah,
you do any of that? Are any of those guys still in the hobby? Do they still have cars, or
yeah,
was it more a time in their life that's like, all right, been there, done that, moved on?
a little bit of both. Some of these guys still have cars, but unfortunately, most of them have long gotten rid of their straight axle cars because at
Yeah.
some point, as they all say, look, we had to like take over our parents' business and have a
Yeah.
family, and that was expected, and that car just wasn't practical. Of course,
Yeah.
can't. Like, how many little kids can you shove in the back of a straight axle 55?
Yeah.
Right,
Makes
and go to the
sense.
grocery store. Yeah.
Yeah.
They got rid of them and then, or they got scrapped or whatever. And then they ended up with like, in some ways, these guys, now in their 70s are just like every other boomer out there. They got their like C2 Corvette.
Right.
They're going to, they're going to Cars and Coffee.
Right.
They got their like, their Velcro stride rights and their
Yep.
like their jorts on. Like 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 a Tommy Bahama shirt. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it's the same guy.
Totally.
Same,
Yeah. Yeah.
out there smoking cigarettes, like with long filters on them because they're trying to,
Yep.
like that kind of stuff. Like they're still, it's some of them are still out there doing it, and they're just car guys, at the
Dude, I
end.
think that's hilarious because it's like, listen, as we all know, there's an evolution to the
Yeah.
car guy, right? There really is. There's like if you ever look at the evolutionary chart, you have like the primates, and then it turns into the human being, and then it kind of goes back to the primate as we get older.
Right.
That's not far off when it comes
No.
to a car guy, right?
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
like we start off in that primate zone where we're just like just want big and motor
Right.
and wheelie and blah 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 blah. Don't care about and then you get a little older and you're like, it'd be cool, like something that actually runs
Yeah.
all the
Like
time.
would be really cool, like a tilt wheel and air conditioning. That would be
Yeah.
cool. Right?
Yeah. And then you get to the point where you're just like, I just want to be comfortable, man. Like
Yeah.
that's it, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. That's
So
exactly
it's
the way these guys are. Like they're still, the a couple of them still have 55 Chevys, but now they're 55 Chevys with like 18-inch Americans, and they're lowered and they're all
yeah,
airbags, and you know
yeah.
what I mean? And there's a stereo in there, and like it's just,
They came from the been there, done that school.
yeah, it's like these things, they're all running like LED headlights now. Like that's what they're like. Yeah, well, it's comfortable. Hey, I still got a 55 Chevy. I'm like, ooh, is it on an axle? Like, no, no. We got rid of that junk years. We got rid of that garbage years ago. Like,
Well, dude, and I find it so funny because now, you and I talk about it like junk because the fact of the matter is we both still own junk,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So like and do we want to drive it every day? Absolutely not. Do we want to drive it once in a blue moon? I mean, sure. Yeah, it's still fun.
right.
But we're still at that point. Like I gotta go to LA tomorrow. I'm taking the Charger there. That's a 400-mile run in a 55-year-old car.
Yeah,
you know and that's a car that I just up like it's got air conditioning now and it's got sounding, and you know what it's going to do? It's still going to beat me to death,
it will. Yeah, it will. Right. That's
and I know this, but there's still that part of you that goes, you know what, I'm not that old yet, I don't need to be that comfortable yet.
right.
And I always wonder if these old guys, like if you could just put them back in the seat of those old gassers and those old straight axle cars, just how they would react to it. If it's something that they would find endearing, or they'd get in and be like, I want nothing to do with this shit box,
Oh man. I would tell you the one character you're going to meet in this. Her name's Catalina Wong, and Cat Wong, she was married to a guy named Jocko, and I don't know Jocko's last name, but Jocko had this pretty woolly 55 Chevy. I mean,
Yeah.
it was way up on an axle. It was like three colors of primer,
Yeah.
at a couple different colors of red at one point or whatever. She still has that car, and
Really?
she is about 4 feet tall, and she like still drives that thing, and
Really?
she's got her little sensible heels on and her little outfit, and she's got her big Jackie O's, and she gets in that thing and 4 speed. It's amazing. Like she's still, and her kid, her son TJ.
Please tell me you have this on video.
Yeah, we actually recreated. We have
Oh,
this one great photo of Kat, as a probably 19-year-old, and
oh
she's
man.
sitting in the car on the passenger side with the door open, and we recreated that shot too.
Oh, how wonderful is
Right
that?
now, yeah, with the car in the Mission District and stuff. It's cool. And she just, like I said, about 4 feet tall, bosses all of us around by she could just move her pinky, and we're all moving. You know what I mean? Like, really. Like she's that one in the subway who can like push a 400-pound dude through the door of the sub
Yeah,
pinky finger, and they don't know what happened. Like, what? Where am I?
right. So Dan, when is this coming out? Because I mean, what I always find amazing is the passion that you have for this stuff is totally infectious. And so it's one of those things where I can't wait for everybody to see this series. And so is the series coming out? Is it quarterly? Is it like when talk to me about the release and when you think it's going to be, coming out and
Yeah.
stuff.
I think it's going to be released right in the middle of March of this year, and it's a 4-part series. I think it's going to be once a week, each episode
Great.
release. Um, what we're trying to do, and you and I have talked about this, we're trying to like dress for the job we want, not the one we have, and actually like
Right.
build these things for a greater audience beyond our own border,
Correct.
right?
Yep.
And we're trying to do that and make it look more like an actual show you would see on TV, that
Correct.
kind of thing.
Without losing. So Dan says that, but without losing the grit, because
Exactly. That's the magic of
yeah,
it, right? Because
that's
we
the
can do
magic.
that. We can keep that grit in there, and we don't have to dilute the story for anyone. Like we can actually tell the authentic story of
Correct.
these Chinese kids,
Yep.
running these woolly cars around San Francisco, the hills of San Francisco. Like we said, remember, these guys, they're not out there like, doing American graffiti out in Modesto in the flats of the Central
Right.
Valley or Kansas where we're talking, like you said, 40-degree transitions on hills in the
Mm-hmm.
city. And like it's impractical to drive a car in the city anyway, much
Of
less
course.
some car with a locker rear and a straight axle and no front brakes, So
Correct.
yeah, I'm hoping that by the end of this, probably a 4-week serial, release,
Mm-hmm.
starting in mid-March, that hopefully we'll be able to like finish the story and actually actually like, because as of this taping, I still don't know if we found the underdog yet. Like we haven't found the underdog yet. Like
Right.
what are we going to do? And hey, TikTok,
Clock's ticking.
right?
Yeah, man.
Like, we got to get this thing done. So yeah, I'll be as amazed as anyone else. We actually
Well,
get it.
dude, I think that, once this gets out there, I think everybody is really looking forward to this series. I think that it's going to open a lot of eyes. I think that it's going to make a lot of people rethink certain things.
Yeah.
Um, I just think to listen about it, to visually be able to see the a great part of American hot rodding come to life.
Yeah.
Um, in a section of the United States that people really didn't think about is going to be an amazing thing. So, dude, thank you so much for coming back to the show. Thanks for talking to us about it. As soon as the first episode goes live, every episode you're coming back on to
Oh man,
do a
I'll be on
little,
there. Yeah,
yeah,
because
man.
because like I said, I wanna spill the beans on everything we've found out so far, but I want to ruin it. So there's some
Right.
suspense in there that we built in that we got to give you some
Hmm.
reason to come back and watch the second episode. So like I don't want to ruin it
Exactly.
yet, but yeah, there's some really good stuff happening, and there's some amazing things that we've uncovered and discovered, and has played a part in this in ways I never thought would happen. So it's really cool, and to have all of this, I think the timing is right. And you had kind of touched on this earlier. Coming out of, let's just face it, coming out of the pandemic and
Hmm.
coming out of this era where once again the Chinese American community is just feeling pressure,
Yep.
unjustly so, but
Yep.
feeling this unnecessary pressure. I really feel like to the idea that we can actually show that in some amazing ways that these guys are car guys, and that is the tie that binds,
Absolutely.
universal
Everything.
equalizer, right? Like
Yep.
that's when car culture really starts to shine, I think.
Yeah. Dude, I couldn't agree more. So, dude, again, thank you for coming on. As
And
soon
thanks
as
for
the
having
episode
me.
airs, you're coming back on. We're going to talk about the first episode of Chinatown Confidential, which will be shown on the Hemmings YouTube channel,
Yep.
right? So if you haven't already, go to YouTube, go to the Hemmings channel, like and subscribe, and it'll send you updates as to when the series, plus all our other series are going live. And my God, we've got 8 shows going up this year. We've got a
Great.
ton of content. Um, also, obviously check out our auctions in our classified section. We've got some beautiful stuff out there. But otherwise, guys, that's it. Thanks for tuning into the barbecue. Stoner, just always amazing to have you on. And
Yeah, great having me, man. I appreciate it. Like I said, I've got one. Matter of fact, I was out in Chinatown again last night, trying to secure some locations. I had to have 17 Mai Tais to be told that I have to come back tomorrow, meaning today, to talk to the manager. So, I'm on my way.
time to start drinking again.
We
All right.
boost our craft,
And
Mike.
we have to. We have to. On that note, folks, we'll see you next time on the barbecue. Take care. Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast and hit that subscribe button. And we'll come to you every week.